The AWS Certified Security Specialty designation proves you are ready for a great career in AWS Cloud. The certification tests your knowledge of specialized data classifications and AWS data protection mechanisms. AWS Certified Security Specialty is best for security professionals who design and implement AWS security solutions. This certification complements the skills and expertise required to perform multiple job roles across cloud architecture, database, networking, and DevSecOps. Professional recognition as a trusted advisor for business cloud information security comes with an excellent salary. An AWS Certified Security Specialty certification holder delivers security solutions to their organization. The AWS Certified Security Specialty exam guide covers data encryption methods, secure internet protocols, and AWS mechanisms, AWS security services to ensure a secure production environment, effective decisions regarding cost, security, and deployment complexity, and understanding of security operations and related risks. Passing the certification exam requires knowledge in 6 content domains. Domain 1, threat detection and incident response. Domain 2, security logging and monitoring. Domain 3, infrastructure security. Domain 4, identity and access management. Domain 5, data protection. And finally, Domain 6, management and security governance. Domain 1 covers threat detection and incident response. How to design and implement an incident response plan. AWS best practices for incident response, cloud incidents, roles and responsibilities in the incident response plan, AWS security finding, implementing credential invalidation and rotation strategies, isolating AWS resources, designing and implementing playbooks for responding to security incidents, deploying security services such as AWS Security Hub, Amazon GuardDuty, and Amazon Inspector, configuring integrations with native AWS services and third-party services using Amazon EventBridge, detecting security threats and anomalies using AWS services is essential in the business. AWS managed security services that detect threats, anomaly and correlation techniques to join data across services, visualizations to identify anomalies, strategies to centralize security findings, evaluating findings from security services, searching and correlating security threats across AWS services, performing queries to validate security events, and creating metric filters and dashboards to detect anomalous activity using Amazon CloudWatch. You must know how to respond to compromised resources and workloads in the AWS environment. The AWS Security Incident Response Guide is a great tool. Resource isolation mechanisms, techniques for root cause analysis, data capture mechanisms, log analysis for event correlation, automating remediation using AWS Lambda or AWS System Manager, responding to compromised resources by isolating Amazon EC2 instances, conducting root cause analysis, capturing relevant forensic data, querying logs in Amazon S3, protecting and preserving forensic artifacts, preparing services for incidents and recovering services after incidents are also critical in this section. Domain 2 highlights security logging and monitoring. Every organization using AWS Cloud Services needs experts to design and implement monitoring and alerting of security events. AWS services may monitor events and provide alarms with CloudWatch and EventBridge. Automating alerting with Amazon's simple notification service is pretty nice. Analyzing architectures to identify monitoring requirements and sources of data for security monitoring. Designing environment monitoring and workload based on business and security requirements. Setting up automated tools and scripts to perform regular audits. And defining the metrics and thresholds that generate alerts. Troubleshooting, security monitoring, and alerting involves configuration of monitoring services, relevant data to indicate security events, analyzing the service functionality, permissions, and configuration of resources after an event, remediating the configuration of custom application, and evaluating logging and monitoring services for alignment with corporate security policy. AWS cloud security teams design and implement logging solutions for AWS services and features that provide logging capabilities, attributes of logging capabilities, log destinations and lifecycle management, configuring logging for services and applications, identifying logging requirements and services for log ingestion, implement log storage and lifecycle management according to AWS best practices and business needs. Troubleshoot logging solution problem calls for capabilities and use cases of AWS services that provide data sources, AWS services and features that provide logging capabilities, access permissions that are necessary for logging, identifying misconfiguration and determining remediation steps for absent access permissions, and determine the cause of missing logs and execute remediation steps. Designing a log analysis solution focuses on services and tools to analyze captured logs, log analysis features on AWS, log format and components, identifying patterns in logs to indicate anomalies and known threats. Domain 3 is all about infrastructure security. The security features on edge services, common attacks, threats, and exploits, including the OWASP Top 10, layered web application architecture, defining edge security strategies for common use cases, selecting appropriate edge services based on anticipated threats and known attacks, the right protection based on anticipated vulnerabilities and risks, defining layers of defense with combined edge security services, applying restrictions at the edge, activating logs, metrics, and monitoring around edge services rounds out the training material. VPN technology, terminology, and usage, on-premise connectivity options with AWS VPN and AWS Direct Connect, implementing network segmentation based on security requirements, designing network controls to permit or prevent network traffic with firewall configuration, managing network flows to keep private data off the public internet, determining redundancy and security requirements for communication between on-premise and AWS cloud. Passing the exam also requires maintenance and provisioning of EC2 instances, IAM instance roles and IAM service roles, services that scan for vulnerabilities in compute workloads, host-based security, creating hardened EC2 AMIs, applying instance roles and service roles as appropriate to authorize compute workloads, scanning EC2 instances and container images for known vulnerabilities, applying patches across a fleet of EC2 instances or container images, activating host-based security mechanisms, analyzing Amazon inspector findings and determining appropriate mitigation techniques, passing secrets and credentials securely to compute workloads. There is a ton of money to be made for those who know how to troubleshoot cloud network security. how to read relevant log sources from Route 53, WAF, and VPC, identifying, interpreting, and prioritizing problems in network connectivity, determining solutions to produce desired network behavior, analyzing log sources to identify problems, and capturing traffic samples for problem analysis using traffic mirroring. Domain 4 places identity and access management in the crosshairs. To design, implement, and troubleshoot authentication, you need to understand methods and services for creating and managing identities, how to troubleshoot authentication issues, establishing identity through an authentication system, setting up multi-factor authentication, and determining when to use the AWS Security Token Service. You must review different IAM policies, components and impact of a policy, constructing attribute-based access control and role-based access control strategies, evaluating IAM policy types for given environments, interpret IAM policy effect on the enterprise, where to apply principle of least privilege, enforcing a proper separation of duties, analyzing access or authorization errors, and investigating unintended permissions, authorization, or privileges to keep the bad guys out. Domain 5 revolves around information protection. The design and implementation of controls that provide data confidentiality and integrity. TLS and VPN concepts are key. Secure remote access methods with SSH or RDP. Systems manager, session manager concepts. How TLS certificates work with various network resources. Designing secure connectivity between AWS and on-premise network. Ensuring mechanisms to require encryption for connections. TLS for AWS API calls, and designing mechanisms to forward traffic over secure connections. It is crucial to implement AWS cloud security controls for data at rest and in transit. Encryption technique selection, integrity checking, IAM roles and policies, designing methods to prevent unauthorized access, configuring services to activate encryption of data at rest. Encryption at rest is enhanced using AWS Cloud HSM. Choosing encryption techniques based on business requirements is going to deliver the most value. The life cycle of data at rest includes lifecycle policies, data retention standards, mastering the S3 lifecycle to retain data for a specific retention period, designing automatic lifecycle management for AWS services, setting a standard schedule and retention time for AWS backup. You will learn how to protect credentials, secrets, and cryptographic key material by utilizing Secrets Manager, Systems Manager Parameter Score, usage and management of symmetric keys and asymmetric keys, oversight and rotation of secrets for workloads. KMS key policies restrict key usage to unauthorized users. KMS key policies restrict key usage to only authorized users. And importing and removing customer provided keys are very important to know. The training concludes with Domain 6, Management and Security Governance. Centrally managing AWS accounts demands, multi-account strategies, managed services for delegated administration, policy-defined guardrails, root account best practices, cross-account roles, directing AWS organizations, implementing and enforcing a policy, security service and aggregated findings management, and the best way to protect AWS root credentials. Secure deployment best practices for cloud resources are always evolving. Tagging, deployment, and versioning of AWS services must be understood. Visibility and control over the AWS infrastructure. How to use CloudFormation to deploy cloud resources. Configuring and deploying portfolios of approved AWS servers. Organizing AWS resources into management groups. Deploying Firewall Manager for policy enforcement. And securely sharing resources in AWS. Evaluating compliance for AWS resources takes you down the rabbit hole to data classification of AWS services, how to assess, audit, and evaluate AWS resources, identifying sensitive data in AWS, creating AWS config rules to identify non-compliant resources, collecting and organizing evidence using Security Hub and AWS Audit Manager. Anyone who may identify security gaps using architectural reviews and cost analysis is essential to sustainability. AWS cost and usage for anomaly detection, strategic reduction of attack surfaces, the AWS Well Architect Framework, analytics based on resource utilization, pinpointing unused resources, and using the AWS Well Architect tool to identify security gaps will get you ready to take on a career as an AWS security specialty cloud security expert.